Well, hello again everybody. Well, today's story starts in the depth of midwinter. I seem to think it was one Friday evening, quite late. It was dark outside and the wind and the rain was going horizontally. And I can remember hearing the engine notes of a black Range Rover as it crawled its way up my gravel driveway and deposited this Hallicrafter S20-R receiver across the threshold. Now I'm afraid what with Christmas fast approaching, I really didn't have a chance to have a look at this radio. It actually had to be moved from out of my hallway because my wife was complaining and wanted to put the Christmas decorations up. So I'm afraid it went straight into the garage, really without having been looked at all by myself. Now, like many other of my eBay purchases, I tend not to spend very much money on radios, and so typically they end up coming to me in not very good condition. Well, I think this one, condition-wise, might be a bridge too far. Let's take a look and, well, let's see what we think. Can it be restored? At this stage, your guess is as good as mine. I can see that at some point this has been resprayed using, I'm guessing, just a rattle can. Maybe the old paint was removed because these used to have really quite an attractive black kind of wrinkle effect paint on them. But I can actually see here as well, first thing I can see is this top corner is severely bashed in. It's got a big dent in it. But looking at the paint, I can see that under the paint, I can see the underlying metal, and that's quite badly pitted. So I suspect at some point this case has been very, very rusty. In fact, I can see the remains of the rust. I can see rust bubbling through there. So this radio has been very, very rusty, and somebody's just flashed it over with another can of paint just to freshen it up a bit. Now, of course, because they have flashed it over with new paint, I'm afraid we've lost all the lettering here on the dials, so I don't know what any of these things do. Okay, we've got a selector switch there. Maybe that's band select, I don't know. Looks like we've got a main tuning control here. Now, taking a look at the original radio knobs, they actually do remind me of automotive wheels. They look just like, you've got like a wheel hub there, and even the tops of the knobs, they've got like a radial tyre pattern on them. They're quite interesting, those. Now, also from the angle that I'm sat at, I can actually see inside, and it looks as though we've got no speaker, so yeah, that's something we're going to have to take a look at. Just looking at these dials for the Bandspread and what is, I'm guessing, the main tuning. They've gone beyond yellow. They're actually brown. They're very badly discoloured. Now, when these sets are in good condition, I would actually say they are quite a very attractive looking radio. Now, I also seem to remember that normally these would have some kind of side panels, some kind of, I'm going to call it Art Deco, kind of Art Deco rails which come around here. Looks like we're missing those features on this radio, and they are quite an attractive feature, so it's a shame that they're no longer on here. We've got, looks like we've got an earphone socket here, but I haven't had a look at the manual, so I'm not exactly sure what the controls are. Shall we take a look inside from the top? Well, I'm afraid this is really where the horror begins. So it does look like we have got a loudspeaker, but I'm pretty sure that this isn't the original speaker. This one looks as though it's made by the Roller Company, which I think is, I'm pretty sure they're a British company, aren't they? And yeah, manufactured in London, England. Now, I seem to remember that these speakers are actually quite collectible. They're quite a desirable speaker. But yeah, you can see we've got some homebrew going on here. This radio certainly shouldn't have this speaker in. Well, I can see we've got our 3-gang tuning condenser here, so that appears to still have its drive string attached. In fact, that actually does look like a new drive string that somebody's put on there, but it does feel really quite crunchy and horrible as I twist it. I can actually see that down here, maybe there was designed to be some bearings or something like that, some plain bearings. Well, it's very, very dirty and rusty, and that's probably why this control just feels so horrid. Now, I can actually see that the Bandspread control does have quite a significant weight on here. It's got a flywheel on it, so I'm sure that this control should feel quite nice. But again, no, it does feel equally horrible and crunchy. Oh, and I can see that it's adjusting these much smaller vanes here. So we've just got like one vane rather than a multiple vane, so this is just providing a very, very fine capacitance adjustment here. Let's wind that in. I think I've said before, tend to keep these things wound in. You know, you want to fully mesh all the vanes on these condensers because it's very easy to catch them when you're working on it. You bend one, you can have problems. So when you're working on a radio, first thing you do is you want to wind these in and fully mesh them. Now again, looking at the chassis, it looks as though effectively I think this has just been, I don't know, maybe sprayed or painted with silver paint. I'm guessing that the chassis would have originally been, I don't know, tin or zinc plated. Not exactly sure, but I don't think it would have been a painted chassis like this. And just looking at the paint, it's been very poorly applied, it's bubbled, it's blistered, and of course we can see all the rust coming through underneath it. Where there is some aluminium left, it's pretty badly oxidised because it's coming off white and powdery, so that's not a good sign. Now, because these are American radios, they do seem to suffer much more from the dreaded silver mica disease than radios in the UK typically do. I don't exactly know why, but that is the case. Maybe it's a lot like some of our transistors that have tin whiskers. We had our problems, they had their problems, and yeah, these are known to be quite a weak point on a lot of Hallicrafter receivers. I think there's a few different types of intermediate frequency transformer. I'm not exactly sure what type this is, but certainly they seem to suffer quite badly from the actual transformers inside going open circuit. So that's certainly something we are going to have to take a look at. So just moving you along a little bit, I'm pretty sure that this is not the original transformer. These transformers were mounted the other way up. They were kind of mounted on their sides, and it should have been through the chassis with just one side, the top side of the transformer exposed. This is actually only held down on one side. It looks as though it's held in with I don't know, a couple of pieces of Meccano. As you can see, it's very, very wibbly wobbly, so that's not been very well done. And you can see tucked away in the corner here we've got an audio output transformer. Again, I don't think this is original. I think this has been added by somebody in the past because again it just doesn't look very well mounted. I'm guessing that the secondary of the output transformer was probably connected on these I don't know, like 13 amp chock blocks or something like that. That's how they connected in that speaker, which we just found floating around inside. So yeah, that looks a little bit how you're doing. The more and more I look at this radio, the more and more I get that sense of dread. I don't mind working on old radios or radios that are in poor condition, but when you get a radio that's been hacked by somebody else and you don't know what they were doing or why they were hacking at it, it makes the repair very much more harder to do. So yeah, it's starting to fill me with dread, this thing already. Okay, let's close the bonnet and have a look underneath her. Hopefully things can't get any worse. Okay, my mistake, things can actually get considerably worse. Now if you go to the Bama Boathanger site, you'll actually be able to download what is quite a beautiful manual for this. It's one that's been, what would you call it? It's been recreated, it's been modified, all the old faded text has been typed up, and the circuit diagrams have been drawn afresh, and somebody put a lot of work into producing that manual. I think it's about 80 pages long, so somebody went to a lot of work doing that, and it's beautiful. And I was really looking forward to actually reading that manual and you know, checking all the components were to factory and getting this radio up and running fairly quickly, because when it comes to repairing radios, I'm not so much of an expert that I don't need a manual. I very much do need a manual. Now of course the problem with this is that somebody has gone considerably off-piste, and I really don't know where to start. Basically we've got wires here which are bare wires, which are, you know, they soldered onto the old cloth covered wiring. We've actually got components effectively like this capacitor here touching the end of this dog bone resistor. So we've got we've got problems, haven't we? So I'm guessing that this bank of capacitors here, which all appear to be common together, these must be replacing the original smoothing capacitor, which I think I can just about see down here. It's had most of its wires cut off it, so I assume the main smoothing cam went bad, and somebody's actually just paralleled up a load of other capacitors, maybe to try and build up the value they wanted. It's never a good sign, is it, when you look at capacitors and they've got big burn marks in them. Several of the capacitors I can see, they've been touched with the side of a soldering iron here, so somebody, when they've been doing the work on this, they perhaps haven't been very careful, or maybe their aspirations kind of were greater than their actual level of skill. I don't know. I don't like to beat up people who've done previous repairs on radios. It doesn't get you anywhere, but they've certainly left me with a lot of work to do. So taking a look at one of our tuning inductors here, I'm not exactly sure which one this is, but we can see that at some point in the past it looks quite badly burnt, the former, and I don't think this bright red wiring, I think somebody's bothered or tried to rewind this inductor. Maybe they've either, the old one had burnt out, or maybe they were trying to slightly change the I don't know, the band or something like that. I can't tell what was in the person's mind. So yeah, that's going to be very suspect. And the inductor which is adjacent to it does also look pretty burnt and in poor condition. I can see that the wax has gone black and all run off to one side. So yeah, that's not a good sign, is it? Now I can see, like a lot of communication receivers, this one has, I'm going to call it some kind of remote selector switch. They have a socket on the back of the transceiver which can be used to do things like mute the set. So if you're running these things with a transmitter, you don't want to have the receiver working when you're actually transmitting. So they usually have some form of remote control interface. I can see we've got a couple of connectors here, so I think this one is something to do with turning on and off the main HT to the set. And I can see we've got another connector at the other side of the chassis, which I think is for an external signal strength meter. I think that these use something like maybe a magic eye valve. I'm not exactly sure, but certainly that looks like it. But again, looking at both these connectors, I can see that a lot of the original wiring has been cut off and things have been bridged, and yeah, I mean, some of this is meant to be high voltage wiring. This is a piece of speaker cable, so yeah, it just fills me with dread. Now I do remember back in December I was actually really excited to receive this radio, and I went ahead and I told some of my friends that I'd bought it and I was going to be restoring it, and when I did take a quick look I noticed that the rectifier valve was missing. Well, one of my very good friends, Andrew Auswaffer, he's actually sent me a rectifier valve to actually go in this set, so you know, I just want to thank Andrew for doing that. I'll put a link into Andrew's channel so you can go and have a look at all the radios that he restores. He does lots of valve radios and a lot of modern transistor radios as well. But yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, for sending me this valve. Unfortunately, I didn't spot it before because I said this is the first time I've looked at this radio. I can see that I believe the rectifier would have gone here, and I can see, I don't know if I can bring you in, somebody's actually hacked away at the valve socket, and they've done that fairly common thing of they've actually they've replaced the valve rectifier with two silicon diodes. Hopefully you can see that. We've got one of the silicon diodes there, and we've got another one there. But looking at these diodes, they are, I can't see what the number is on them, but they look, just from the body style, the shape of them, these do look like quite old silicon rectifier diodes. They're certainly not modern ones, so yeah, we don't know what they are. Now, as I said earlier, when I bought this radio I realised that it had some modifications, but I didn't realise that it had been quite so badly butchered as it had, and I also wasn't aware that so many of the original parts had been replaced. It looks like getting this radio up and running will probably be quite a lot of work, maybe more work than I want to put into it. I actually kind of think that if I actually wanted a Hallicrafter S20, a better thing to do would be perhaps just pay a little bit more money and get a better radio as a starting point, because this is never going to be as good as it could be. There's just too much cosmetic damage. Too many of the original parts have been replaced, and I don't think it will come good. that's just my opinion at the moment. I'd love to hear your comments on it. So normally, you know that I'm normally very painstaking when I bring these radios up. I spend a lot of time checking transformers and output transformers and IFT cores. We go through it very, very gradually. I think I'm not going to do that on this occasion because I guess I don't feel so invested in it right now. So I'm going to give you what many people that watch these channels want. I'm going to give you a cold start stroke resurrection video. I'm going to put some power on it. We're going to run it up on the Variac and we'll see if it squeals or smokes or does anything. And then depending on the outcome of that test, we'll decide if we're going to go any further or not. Now, of course, even for a resurrection video, I am going to make a couple of checks, a couple of safety checks, because, you know, I don't want to get electrocuted live on video. So let's just make some checks to see if the equipment is actually earthed. Although, having said that, I am going to run this from an isolation transformer, but yeah, let's check that it's electrically safe. Well, electrically safe is a relative term, isn't it? I don't think this is going to be electrically safe by any stretch of the imagination. Right, okay, can we even find some metal that isn't covered in paint? Let's try a screw there. Okay, 1.5 megs. 5 megs to the chassis. That doesn't inspire confidence at the moment. 5 megs to the chassis. Okay, I'm not seeing an earth there, so that's not a good start. Are we seeing a transformer? No, I can't even see the resistance of the transformer windings. Of course, I don't know whether it's switched on or not. Okay, yeah, is it switched on? I don't know. Okay, I'm going to read the manual. I don't think there's any point in reading the manual because I'm sure half of these switches don't do what they should do. Let me get the manual out and we'll take a look at the power supply and see if it bears any resemblance to anything. At this stage I very much doubt it. I can see where the earth wire comes in. It goes to a tag strip and it looks as though there's a piece of wire coming off that tag strip and it looks as though it's going to the transformer, but I can't exactly tell what part of the transformer it's going to because that's on the opposite side of the chassis. It's fair to say it's dubious. It's dubious in the extreme. So I think that earth wire does come onto this transformer. It's a little bit hard to tell because all I'm seeing is kind of a uniform grey mushy mess of wiring. A lot of the colouring has come off the wiring and it's right tucked down here at the back of the chassis. So unfortunately I can't actually see what any of those windings are. The sensible thing would probably be to be removing this transformer completely and reverse engineer it and actually put the transformer back in and rewire it safely. Yeah, I'm not going to do that, can't be bothered. So it appears just by disturbing some of this wiring we have now achieved an earth. Certainly the transformer is earthed. The chassis seems to be getting earthed intermittently. So I think what I will do is I'm just going to try and clean up some of the connections and maybe I'll find a position just to solder an earth wire onto the chassis. I think there is an earth there, it's just intermittent. There's something not quite right with it. I've gone ahead and I've marked all the valves because for the first power up I think what we'll do is we will remove all the valves because we don't know if they're correct or not, or we don't want to risk burning out the filaments. So I've gone ahead and I've written in silver paint on top of them. So it looks as though these are all RCA valves and they've got made in the USA on them. So this one is a CRC 6AC7 and I don't know if that's a date code. It says January on January. Jan. Is there any other dates on there? Not sure. Yeah, for the first power up I want to have all the valves pulled because we don't know if the heater supplies, or we don't know anything about this transformer. It could be totally wrong. Now I'm guessing if it was wrong these would have been burnt out by the previous owner, but yeah, it's good practice to take them out. So looking at this one, trying to read the number on it, I think that's a 6SG7. Now I've got to admit, I'm not particularly familiar with this type of this valve. These with the I'm going to call it a metallized envelope. It's not a type of valve that I've come across very often. My understanding is a lot of these were kind of spin-offs from the military. They were used a lot or developed for things like radar applications, is my understanding. So maybe these were maybe war surplus, army surplus valves. Not exactly sure. Leave it in the comments. CRC 6S G7. VT211, again says January on it. Wow, this is a funny little thing. VT90 6H6. Okay, we've got a different valve here. We've got a CV 1990 6SQ7, which this one says it's made in England by Haltron, England. That's not a valve company I've come across before, Haltron. Yep, not heard of them, but this seems much more modern, or certainly it hasn't been stored in a damp environment, because unlike the other valves it isn't covered in rust. Don't know, is that a triode or something? And finally V6. This valve is really rusty, the envelope is yeah, falling apart. I can't actually even make out what the writing is on that. I can just see the word Rayafon. Now according to the circuit diagram, this is the audio output valve and it should be a 6F6. Okay, there is some writing there. I think that may say 6F6. Again, so rusty and corroded it's hard to tell. Now I can also see sticking out the back of the transformer is a tapping select switch. So I'm guessing that maybe this radio was 110 volts and somebody's maybe put another transformer in to convert it to the British market. But unfortunately, much like the rest of the radio, they haven't really done a very good job of installing it. Well, I'm afraid I've just been doing what I normally do, which is just undoing random screws, because I think this might be easier to work on and get access to if we can take it out of its cover, which I'm sure must be possible to do. Yeah. Okay, that has given us quite a lot better access. Well, we can see a lot more now. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The more I see, the more scared I'm becoming. It looks as though the whole front should come off this, maybe. Is it held on from the bottom? I think we'll have to get all the knobs off it to do that. Let's see how easy it is to take the knobs off. I think this has been messed around with relatively recently, so you know, maybe the knobs shouldn't be too seized up with a bit of luck. So I've just removed one of those knobs, and don't you think that this just looks like an automotive car wheel and tyre? That's a lovely little detail on there. Again, really reminds me of the Art Deco era. I'm not exactly sure what's holding this into the chassis now. I'm thinking probably not very much. I think it's out at the front. Maybe it's just been held at the back somewhere. Yeah, not much of a cold start video this, is it? I've misled you. I can't do it. As much as I've tried just to plug valve receivers in and you know, switch them on like Shangu does. I know it's exciting. I just can't do it. I guess I just respect these things too much, and I don't want to destroy them. Oh, there we go, she's out. I think these tuning dials look quite vulnerable, so I'm going to see if we can just take these off. Yeah, amazingly, nothing seems to have put up too much of a fight so far, does it, in terms of nuts and bolts and things like that. So it looks as though we've got, I suppose we should have checked this earlier, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bands. Oh no, maybe not, one's a logging scale, maybe we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bands. So it looks as though this is a 4-band receiver. Again, I should have gone ahead and read all the information about this set, shouldn't I? But I kind of like to discover it in my own time. So I can see we've got our main smoothing capacitor here. Not exactly sure how many sections it is. It looks as though it could be at least 2 sections, but as we saw earlier on the underside of the chassis, a lot of the wires have been disconnected, they've been cut off it, so I'm guessing that this smoothing capacitor probably failed at some point in the past, being an electrolytic, and somebody tried to replace it with those more modern capacitors. Unfortunately, they didn't do such a neat job of it. Got some green wires here, which are obviously the dial lamp bulbs. I'm going to have to take care of them, make sure that we don't short them out on anything on the chassis. Maybe I can tuck that up on there. And again, maybe not. So I've gone ahead and had a quick look at the manual, and I've scribbled the name of all the controls on the front of the chassis here. So from the left hand side we've got RF gain, band select, audio gain, AVC control on and off, BFO on and off, which is beat frequency oscillator, which is used for resolving CW communication, A&L, which is automatic noise limiter. We've got a tone switch. Now unusually this is a step tone switch rather than being a variable tone switch, so I find that a little bit unusual. We've got a pitch adjustment here, which is to do with the frequency of the BFO, which again is for resolving CW, and we've also got a send and receive switch here, which makes me think that this set was designed to be operated maybe with a separate transmitter module, probably a separate CW transmitter, so you would actually be able to switch the receiver on and off, the audio on and off, depending on whether you were transmitting or receiving, so you didn't deafen yourself. So we've got 1, 2, 3 intermediate frequency transformers, and I'm praying that they're going to be good. There's our electrolytic, which was hacked off underneath the chassis, and on this side here we looked at this, we've got this 3-gang variable capacitor with the end gang here. This is the antenna tuning section, then we've got the RF front end tuning, and then with final section here at the front is our local oscillator adjustment, because again this is a superhet receiver. Well, after my normal amount of fanning around, I think I'm ready to try to put some power on this, or almost at the point. I want to do a couple of quick transformer tests, which really consists of just making sure that we can see the resistance of the transformer. So we're getting a reading there of 166 kiloohms, which is definitely wrong. That isn't what I would expect. Now interestingly enough, it actually says that the on-off switch for this receiver is actually driven from the tone control. Okay, so when the receiver is switched on, again it's coming up with about megohms. Infinite megohms. So that could just be a dirty switch, couldn't it? Okay, 25 ohms. So it appears that we've got a bad switch. Will that respond to some cleaner? Because after all, it has been some days since I've covered the inside of a receiver and all of my bench in deoxit. Okay, so that has cleaned up. That's coming up 25 ohms. Sounds about right for a transformer, anywhere between 25 ohms and maybe a couple of hundred. But certainly if it was probably much lower than 20 ohms, I would be questioning that. Let's just go ahead and check for an earth again to the chassis before we go any further. That looks like it's a clean piece of metal. And I'm getting 0.3 ohms, so yeah, it does look as though we've got an earth continuity. You really don't want to look at these connections down here, I promise you. You do not want to see the state of them. Well, don't blame me, I did warn you not to look, didn't I? Now, of course, we're almost certainly going to regret this, but let's do an insulation resistance test. So to do that, you actually need to keep the receiver switched on. You need to short both the live and the neutral connections together at the plug lead. You put one end of the insulation tester on there, and then again you want to find a piece of metal on here which you think is going to be a good earth, which is that one. Because we're operating at 230 volts here in the UK, it's typical to do an insulation test at twice the mains voltage. So for us, that would be 500 volts. So there we go, 500 volts. Okay, and that's actually reading 27, 28 megohms and is climbing. that's actually a pretty good reading, that. So that's okay. I suspect that that reading will improve even more because this piece of equipment has been stored in my damp garage for a few months since, you know, before Christmas. So some dampness will definitely have got into that transformer. So that reading will only get better, hopefully, and increase as it warms up. So what I think we'll do next is we'll get out the variac and the lamp limiter, we'll run everything off our isolation transformer and we'll put some power on it. Now I've got to remember that this has got a solid state rectifier in it. Somebody's been in here and replaced the valve rectifier with 2 diodes. So as soon as we turn the power up we should start to see some HT across these capacitors. We probably would see some if they weren't actually shorting out against all the other components, but yeah, we'll forget we saw that as well, it'll be fine. We're back on the bench with the variac, got it turned down to 0 at the moment, so let's switch on. So we've got about 100 volts on it there. Keep one hand in your pocket, obviously. Okay, so we've got 90 volts on the incoming tag strip at the moment. Okay, it does look like we've got 190 volts there. So it is going to come up higher than perhaps we would expect because we've got no valves in and we're not exactly sure what this transformer is in anyway. Okay, so I can see that our lamp here is glowing very, very dimly. I can see that it's glowing dimly. I did previously go ahead and I checked the resistance across the main smoothing capacitors and the reading I was getting was in the kiloohm, so we appeared not to have a short circuit, or certainly we didn't have a short circuit when there was just low level voltage across them. Of course they often fail when you put more voltage across them, so they may go with a bang at any point. Now looking at the style of these capacitors, I'm kind of guessing that they may be 70s or 80s, these ITT brand, and I think the 2 grey capacitors that I can see are probably both the RS branded capacitors. Well, I've had this powered up on the bench for about an hour now and I'm glad to say that there's nothing getting hot or smoking, so I'm going to take that as a good sign. We've got about 6.5 volts, maybe a bit more than that on these lamp supplies, so I'm guessing that the valve heaters are going to be about right. I'm going to plug some valves in and let's see if it does anything. So I just went ahead and I've given this set a quick test. Now I've got to admit a lot of these valves felt quite cold. I only had it on for a few minutes. The actual output valve here was hot, but the others felt cold, which makes me believe probably we should check these. The set had that particular type of deafness which I would associate with, I don't know, either just a bad speaker or for example an open circuit output transformer. I wasn't getting any hum or anything in the audio section, which is never a good sign. Typically this radio I think would need to have some shorting links installed to make it operate, which I may have mentioned earlier, but I suspect the way that this connector at the back here is where you would install the shorting links. To me that looks so badly hacked. I think whoever modified it has probably already gone away and done that for me. You know what? I'm wondering if I've done something really stupid in that I've assumed that this is an output transformer. You know what? I don't think it is an output transformer. I think that's a choke. I could see these wires coming out of it and I thought they were coming out of the transformer. And I don't think they are. What on earth is going on here? So where is this speaker actually connected to if it isn't connected to the output transformer? Let's go ahead and unplug. Now some of these, I think some of these Hallicrafter receivers actually used to use a high impedance speaker, but I don't think this is one of them. That's not what I was expecting. So somebody's actually gone ahead and they have connected the speaker directly to the output of the amplifier valve. Yes, that's not going to work, is it? You see, this is what happens when you get butchered sets. This is the shenanigans that goes on. So somebody has decided that a 2 ohm speaker, it seems to present about roughly a 2 ohm load. A 2 ohm load is obviously a perfect match for this output valve. Yes. No, it's not. So taking another look at the circuit diagram for this radio, it appears that the actual original speaker, or the original circuit, used to employ the speaker field windings as a choke for some smoothing. Now this type of speaker uses a permanent magnet rather than the field windings, so yeah, that isn't going to work. So what I think they probably did is, at some point they must have replaced the loudspeaker field windings with this choke, because this isn't original. I thought that was an output transformer, because if you look at it you can see it looks like an output transformer. I can see 4 wires here. I'm sure you can see. Can you see 4 wires as well? So what I assumed was that these 2 wires were coming from the well, one was coming from the HT supply, the other one was coming from the top of the output valve, from the anode, and assumed that these other 2 wires were actually the secondary of our output transformer. But that is very much not the case. This isn't the case. Yeah, I think some of these Hallicrafters also employed high impedance speakers in the order of 5,000 ohms. I'm not exactly sure about this particular model, this number 20 model. I'm not sure, but certainly some of them did. But this audio arrangement, it isn't going to work, because this is a low impedance speaker, and it does appear to being fed directly from the anode of our valve. It's quite hard to see what's going on, because the circuit here is in just such a horrendous mess. As I've said before, it's been hacked around, pulling the cobwebs out, literally having to pull the cobwebs out of the way. Okay, so this is coming up as 7.2 ohms, so it's an 8 ohm speaker. So who could have predicted that an 8 ohm speaker wasn't actually an ideal load for an output valve, eh? Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've temporarily replaced our output transformer with this Velleman signal tracer, and I'm just hoping that maybe we'll get something. Doesn't feel like it's going down.
Only 2 incidents everyone's talking about, those 2 first half Wales drive. I mean, it's been a great game apart from that, but they will be debated.
Well, I think the main tuning condenser, I think we've got a vein shorting out. I suspect that's what the problem is.
Inside, strike, flipped on by click.
So we maybe have one band there working. I don't know what that is, maybe medium wave or long wave, not sure.
Continue forever.
And the rest of Coily Tweaks.
Win. Win Jones, the warhorse. You scored the only goal in the 5th minute. Wings.
Well, you know what? I'm going to call it at this point because my room is just filling with smoke. Well, as you can see, this Hallicrafter radio is showing some basic signs of life, but certainly it's not in a good way, and it would take quite a lot of work to restore it. I think also this band select switch could be damaged. It doesn't feel right when you turn it. It feels very crunchy. That may respond to some cleaning, but I'm really not sure. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure how much work I want to put into this radio, because it's not original and the condition of it is just so poor. I think it will take an awful lot of work to actually make this thing work even passably well, let alone to actually work well. So I'm not really inclined to take it much further. But perhaps you want to leave it in the comments. Perhaps if you really hate me, you will leave it in the comments and say you need to go ahead and restore it. I'm really hoping you'll say that put it in the bin and move on to something else. I'll tell you what, I'll leave it up to you. If you want to see more of this radio in the future, leave it in the comments.